Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, where we explore the most gripping, true stories of corruption, power, and the costly lessons from history. If you enjoy stories like these, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Every subscription from you is motivation for me to keep bringing more compelling and authentic stories. Thank you for being here, and now let's get started. The corruption case of former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, a young political star. Kwame Malik Kilpatrick was born on June 8, 1970, in Detroit, Michigan, into a family with a deep political legacy. His mother, Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, was a longtime U.S. Congresswoman representing the Detroit area. His father, Bernard Kilpatrick, was also active in local politics. From an early age, Kwame was raised in an environment where power and political influence were ever present. He graduated from Florida A&M University with a bachelor's degree in political science, then earned a law degree from the Detroit College of Law. From early on, Kwame revealed an ambition to lead Detroit out of its decades-long crisis. Once America's automotive powerhouse, the city had been in free fall due to massive job losses, rise in violence, government corruption, and a dwindling population. The combination of his political pedigree, imposing stature, charismatic public speaking, and skillful campaigning turned Kilpatrick into a rising star of the Michigan Democratic Party. In his early 20s, he ran for the Michigan House of Representatives and won, becoming the youngest ever leader of the Democratic caucus. This achievement led local media to dub him the Golden Boy of Detroit politics. The pinnacle of his career came in 2001 when Kilpatrick decided to run for mayor of Detroit. At the time, the city was in a severe financial crisis, with chronic budget deficits and some of the nation's highest unemployment and crime rates. Detroiters pinned immense hopes on this young, energetic leader who promised to inject fresh life into a decaying administration. With a strong campaign message centered on renewal, unity, and Black pride, Kwame Kilpatrick garnered passionate support from African American voters, local businesses, and labor organizations. He vowed to return Detroit to its golden era, to grow the economy, create jobs, and restore public trust. The November 2001 election ended in a landslide victory. In early 2002, Kilpatrick was sworn in as Detroit's mayor at just 31 years old, becoming the youngest mayor in the city's history. His image appeared everywhere in the American press, a youthful, smiling face, holding aloft his plan to transform Detroit. The media hailed him as the new model of urban leadership in America. On the inauguration stage, Kilpatrick addressed thousands. "This is Detroit's time. We will rise, unite, and build a city that our children will be proud of." However, no one could have foreseen that behind the optimistic facade and bold promises, Kilpatrick was constructing a personal power machine. The administration he built was not just a vehicle for reform, it quickly became a vast gold mine that he and his allies exploited for personal enrichment. City contracts, construction projects, and public funds were transformed into tools for trading favors and amassing wealth for himself and his inner circle. In the early years, Kilpatrick's reputation held up, Sustained by his eloquence and broad political network, many Detroiters still believed he could rescue their exhausted city. But cracks began to show more and more clearly: extravagant spending of public funds, an authoritarian leadership style, and a spreading chorus of rumors about corruption and abuses of power. The downfall of Kwame Kilpatrick did not happen overnight. It was a years-long tragedy, as the luster of a young political star, once celebrated as a symbol of renewal, was slowly eclipsed by unchecked ambition and insatiable greed. Corrupt and extortionate practices. Throughout his tenure from 2002 to 2008, Kwame Kilpatrick turned the Detroit city government into his personal power base, where he and his close associates built a sophisticated and sprawling web of corruption. Kilpatrick's power apparatus not only controlled budgets and public contracts, but also relied on threats, coercion, and manipulation of businesses for personal gain. According to the federal indictment, Kilpatrick and his co-conspirators, most notably his longtime friend Bobby Ferguson, owner of a construction company, colluded to split and profit from nearly every major city project. Any construction firm hoping to secure lucrative contracts was required to pay kickbacks. Otherwise, they would be removed from consideration or have their payments delayed indefinitely. The bribes weren't always envelopes stuffed with cash. Companies often had to disguise illegal payments as campaign contributions, consulting fees, or community support. In reality, the money flowed directly into Kilpatrick's pocket or was distributed to his inner circle to maintain their political control. Some of the key practices described in the indictment included: Kilpatrick received millions of dollars in bribes in exchange for awarding city contracts to construction firms, transportation providers, and infrastructure maintenance companies. Contractors were forced to pay connection fees, sometimes amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars, to maintain relationships and ensure projects continued without disruption. Businesses that refused were threatened by the administration, had their licenses revoked, or saw their contracts terminated. Several companies that resisted ended up bankrupt or forced to close their Detroit offices. Kilpatrick also exploited his position to arrange jobs and kickbacks for friends and relatives, turning the city's bureaucracy into a political mafia-style protection racket. It didn't stop there. Kilpatrick used public funds and bribe money to finance a brazenly lavish lifestyle, even as Detroit was mired in a budget crisis. Some expenditures revealed in court outraged the public: luxury vacations to Las Vegas, California, and exclusive resorts with his entourage and close staff. Private jets chartered for personal events and family trips instead of using commercial flights. Shopping for designer clothes, luxury SUVs, and extravagant parties, later categorized as official business or city representation. He even billed the city nearly $12,000 per month in phone charges, most of which were for private texting and personal calls. One of the linchpins enabling Kilpatrick's corruption network to operate smoothly was Bobby Ferguson. As the administration's favored contractor, Ferguson was repeatedly awarded critical infrastructure projects: road repairs, water system installations, and city upgrades. For every major project approved, Ferguson would kick back payments to Kilpatrick or help fund his political campaigns to keep him in power. According to federal prosecutors, Kilpatrick and Ferguson manipulated virtually every major construction initiative in Detroit during his time in office, turning the city into their private playground. While residents struggled with unemployment and crime, The Kilpatrick administration spent taxpayers' money on luxury and self-enrichment. Witnesses, including business owners and former city officials, testified in court that if you wanted to survive in Detroit, you had no choice but to pay bribes. Otherwise, you might as well disappear from Detroit. The brazenness, scale, and sophistication of this scheme made it one of the largest local government corruption scandals in U.S. history. It also laid the groundwork for an extensive criminal investigation lasting years, culminating in the trial of Kilpatrick and his associates. The sex tech scandal. In 2008, Kwame Kilpatrick became embroiled in a scandal that shocked the American public, not only for its moral dimension, but also because of its serious legal consequences. During the proceedings of a labor lawsuit, thousands of private text messages between Kilpatrick and his chief of staff, Christine Beatty, were made public. The messages clearly revealed their long-running affair, directly contradicting their prior denials. Earlier, a group of Detroit police officers had accused Kilpatrick of firing them for investigating his extramarital relationship with Beatty. For months, Kilpatrick denied everything, insisting he had no improper relationship and claiming the allegations were part of a plot to bring him down. However, once the messages were released, full of flirtation, rendezvous planning, and explicit details, their lies completely unraveled. The immediate consequence was that the city of Detroit was forced to pay over $8 million in taxpayer funds to settle the civil lawsuit with the dismissed officers. Detroit residents were outraged that they had to bear such a massive cost solely because the mayor and his chief of staff tried to cover up their personal scandal. The episode also exposed Kilpatrick's reckless leadership style and his disregard for the law and public ethics. After the scandal broke, national media began to dig deeper into his finances, contracts, and lavish lifestyle. Many journalists called it a bombshell that triggered a sweeping corruption probe, ultimately leading to the series of serious criminal indictments that followed. The federal investigation, after years of public suspicion and relentless media scrutiny, in 2010, federal authorities officially launched a comprehensive investigation to uncover the full extent of Kwame Kilpatrick's misconduct and that of his associates. By the end of that year, a federal grand jury indicted Kilpatrick on 24 serious criminal charges, reflecting an unprecedented scale of corruption and abuse of power in Detroit. The indictment included charges ranging from conspiracy to commit corruption, extortion of businesses, fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of public funds. Federal prosecutors alleged that he had turned the mayor's office into a profit machine, forcing companies to pay millions of dollars in bribes to keep contracts and avoid retaliation. The trial lasted more than 5 consecutive months, becoming one of the largest local corruption proceedings in U.S. history. Prosecutors presented hundreds of pieces of evidence, including bank statements, manipulated contracts, emails, private text messages, and testimony from numerous business owners who admitted they had been coerced to pay a percentage if they wanted to keep operating in Detroit. The investigation also revealed how Kilpatrick concealed illicit funds through layers of accounts and entities under the guise of campaign funds. He was also found to have failed to report massive bribe income on his taxes. In court, the image of a leader once celebrated as a symbol of renewal completely collapsed, giving way to the anger and disappointment of Detroit residents. People who had once believed he would lead the city out of crisis. A record sentence. After a months-long trial filled with shocking evidence and testimony, on March 11, 2013, Kwame Kilpatrick heard the final verdict that would seal his political fate. Federal Judge Nancy Edmonds sentenced Kilpatrick to 28 years in federal prison, one of the harshest sentences ever imposed for a local government corruption case in the United States. In a courtroom packed with reporters and Detroit residents, a tense silence fell as the sentence was read. Many who had once seen him as a symbol of hope bowed their heads quietly. Some victims, business owners who had been extorted for bribes, could not hide their emotion as justice was finally served. In addition to nearly 3 decades behind bars, Kilpatrick was ordered to pay $4.6 million in restitution, the amount he and his co-conspirators had embezzled and siphoned from public funds and Detroit taxpayers, who were already struggling. His close friend and most important accomplice, Bobby Ferguson, was also sentenced to 21 years in federal prison. Ferguson was identified as the right hand who helped Kilpatrick manipulate nearly all of the city's construction contracts. During Kilpatrick's tenure, Ferguson's company received hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts, many awarded without transparent bidding, in exchange for steady bribes and kickbacks. When delivering the sentence, Judge Nancy Edmonds looked Kilpatrick straight in the eye, her voice calm but firm. "You turned public office into an instrument of personal enrichment. You betrayed the trust of the citizens of Detroit, people who look to you to reform and lead the city out of crisis. While residents sacrificed, lost services, and lost jobs, you and your co-defendants seized every opportunity to serve your own greed." Her words rang out like a final conclusion, closing the chapter on the career of a politician once hailed as a young star of American politics. After the verdict, federal prosecutors said this sentence was meant to send a clear message: corruption will not be tolerated, no matter who commits it or how high their office. They emphasized that Kilpatrick had exploited his power at a time when Detroit was collapsing to feed his own greed, an act that not only broke the law, but also shattered the community's fragile trust. Millions of Detroit residents, people who had once placed their hopes and their votes in him, had to watch as the young mayor they believed would save the city ended up behind bars. Devastating impact on Detroit. After Kwame Kilpatrick was convicted and began serving his federal prison sentence, the city of Detroit did not recover. Instead, it sank even deeper into financial crisis. In 2010, just a few months after the historic sentence was handed down, Detroit officially declared bankruptcy, marking the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. This crisis was the result of decades of poor management, a shrinking population, and industrial decline. But in the eyes of many residents, Kilpatrick's time in the mayor's office pushed Detroit to the final brink. Throughout his tenure, the city's budget was drained to fund his lavish lifestyle and the corruption network he had built. Money that should have paid for public services, schools, road maintenance, or relief for the poor was siphoned away into connection fees, campaign donations, or Kilpatrick's personal expenses and those of his cronies. After the corruption scandal was exposed, Detroit lost not only millions of dollars, but something even more precious: the trust of its residents and investors. Businesses were reluctant to expand in a city where public contracts had to be bought to be awarded, and development projects were manipulated by well-connected power brokers. When Detroit fell into bankruptcy, more than $1 billion in public debt weighed on residents' shoulders. The city was forced to slash services, close schools, lay off employees, and reduce the pensions of tens of thousands of public workers. People had to live in increasingly desolate neighborhoods with streetlights shut off, a depleted police force, and emergency response times stretching to over an hour, the worst among major U.S. cities. Against this backdrop, the image of Kwame Kilpatrick became a bitter symbol of the worst consequences of corrupt power. He had once been the golden boy, the fresh-faced leader promising to revive Detroit, but he ultimately became living proof of the corruption of power. A celebrated leader turned into a federal criminal. An environment of rampant graft, a government turned into a tool for special interests rather than the public good. A profound loss of trust. Many Detroiters said that after this case, they no longer believed in any promise of reform. For Detroit, the story of Kilpatrick is not just a criminal case. It is a reminder that a city, even one that was once an icon of industry and prosperity, can collapse when power goes unchecked and greed is allowed to flourish in the shadows. Later developments, after being sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, one of the harshest punishments for local government corruption in U.S. history, Kwame Kilpatrick began serving his sentence at a federal facility in Texas. For nearly 8 years behind bars, he all but disappeared from public life. Occasionally, the media mentioned his name as a symbol of power corrupted and the painful failures that had befallen Detroit. However, everything changed unexpectedly in early 2021. In the final days of his term, President Donald Trump issued a flurry of pardons and commutations for numerous controversial figures, including Kwame Kilpatrick. Trump's decision to commute his sentence immediately sparked fierce debate. Critics argued that Kilpatrick did not deserve leniency when Detroit was still grappling with the aftermath of his time manipulating city government and when he still owed millions of dollars in restitution. But supporters contended that the 28-year sentence was excessively harsh for corruption charges and that he had paid enough after nearly a decade behind bars. Thanks to the commutation, Kilpatrick was released early, leaving federal prison after just under 8 years served, not even a third of the original sentence. On the day he walked out of the facility, Kilpatrick told reporters that he had repented, found God, and was ready to rebuild his life. In the months following his release, Kilpatrick began reappearing in the media, but no longer as a politician. He granted interviews to various local and national outlets, sharing stories of his time in prison, his remorse, and his determination to change. He insisted he had no political ambitions and instead wanted to focus on spiritual renewal and community support. To fulfill that commitment, Kilpatrick announced the creation of a nonprofit organization, Movemental Ministries, aimed at helping formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society and inspiring positive transformation through faith-based outreach. Although he claimed to have entered a new chapter, Kwame Kilpatrick's image remains deeply polarizing. To many Detroit residents, he is the corrupt official who drove the city further into despair. To some supporters, he is proof that redemption and a new start are possible. Kilpatrick's journey, from political golden boy to federal criminal to pardoned ex-convict, has become one of the most contentious stories in Detroit's modern history. It raises profound questions about justice, mercy, and whether those who once exploited power for personal gain can ever truly change.